Okay, great. So very warm welcome to the fourth session, right? So we are in the fourth session now. So we will have a workshop today. The workshop, in the sense, it's not a lecture as usual. It will have a more of a practical, application, right? So how we do this stakeholder analysis. So what it entails, and who are the actors, and how they participate. And we will also see, how the public policy cycle, right? So because if we understand public policy cycle, how it works, how it functions, then we will be able to appreciate what actually is stakeholder is all about, and how stakeholder is important to the policy making, and especially particularly for this digital innovation, right? So because digital innovation has a different elements, the way we understand by now, and it also has a different kind of a stakeholder mapping, right? So because of the way it has evolved in the knowledge production process. So we will see that now. So Jai Bhim to everyone. So let's start now. Okay. So let me share the screen now. So let's recap what we have, what we discussed last class, right? So we discussed how ecosystem is evolved. Basically, it is derived from actor network theory, and this actor network theory is nothing but different actors who are heterogeneous in nature, in the sense they are different from their segments, their sectors, their functionality, their role. They're very different. Some of them are government actors, some of them are private actors, some of them are startups, some of them are academic actors, some of them are civil society actors. So they all, have a role to play, and in a way, they are interconnected, and they are also interdependent in certain ways. So that's why it is important to understand ecosystem is built on this theory, right? So actor network theory. The ecosystem is nothing but, again, it's either a network in a virtual world, or it is a place based, because earlier it started as a place based, where a city or in a geography, different actors connect, and they depend on each other to achieve the goals what they have intended to achieve. So that is how the whole ecosystem has evolved. But now, virtual networks, we have digital space. So in digital space, you don't need to be located in one place, right? So different actors are located in different geographies, and they all interact in the digital space. So that's how digital ecosystem evolved. But still, place has a role to play in that, because we still live in nation state, and there is jurisdictional processes. So where you have to pay taxes, you have to be abide by legal and regulatory compliances. So and of course, the social social contours, right? Social, where we are also part of the particular society where we are located in an ecosystem. So that's why it's an important exercise to understand who are these stakeholders, and where they come from, which segment of the society or economy, and how they interact with each other. So and what is their prominence, right? So what is their importance in digital economy or digital space? So that we will see today, and this we learned in the last class. So before we go into the stakeholder analysis, I would like to give you a small, a short peek into how policy is developed in a government setup, right? In a nation state setup. Either it could be a national government or a state government. In some places, even it is a city government. So how the policy is developed, implemented, and reformed, right? So this is a process where it is an iterative process, in the sense it doesn't go linear, in a linear fashion, right? So once you identify the challenge, let's say you need an innovation policy. Why you need an innovation policy? Because innovation policy will bring certain economic advantage to your population, your nation, or your state, your geography. So I asked, last in the last class we discussed about an assignment, right? So how do you understand Indian innovation policy, the new science technology innovation policy? So how you understand it, and what do you think about the goals, and how you interpret or you assess the overall policy. And it's very specific to diversity and inclusion. It's like how it handles this particular topic, right, within the policy. And I've also mentioned about coming up with key recommendations. So I only got one submission till now. So I hope you guys will work on this and submit soon, right? So okay, so my Hindi is not good, so please forgive me for that, because I am not a native Hindi speaker. So I will try to explain in Hindi. If you don't understand, please tell me, message there. If anything you don't understand, then I will try to explain in Hindi, or maybe somebody from maybe I think Swapna ji is there here, so she may translate it to Hindi if if I fail to explain you in Hindi, right? So I try to do it, but I cannot assure you, because I am not a native speaker. So excuse me for that. Okay, yeah. So I understand. Yeah. So yeah. So the policy cycle is basically how governments try to that's where the science and science technology innovation policy I wanted you guys to go through, so that you understand this policy cycle, right? So what they're trying to do, how the policy is developed, right? So once policy is developed, what are the next steps? Who are the stakeholders? When they talk about, because the most of the document, the document is the stakeholders, and the terms like stakeholders, ecosystem, innovation, and these all are mentioned n number of times, right? So maybe sometimes they are mentioned 100 times. Innovation is hundreds of times, and ecosystem is also something like more than 50 times, and stakeholders, that's also more than 50. So you can make sense, right? So once you understand, once you have you have some idea about what actually digital innovation is, and how digital innovation policy is, what it means. And we know some definitions, and we also understood we discussed some kind of conceptual frameworks, how they've evolved, and how they are linked to today's digital economy and digital innovation process. So this we understood from different sessions. But now if you go through the document, then you will be able to make sense, right? So you will be able to link that to what we are discussing here in the session. So this will be very easy for you guys. So that's why I wanted you to go through it and then put in your own words, right? So it doesn't matter whether there is no right and wrong here, right? There is nothing, because even the governments, right, the best of the governments, like even the US and UK, European governments, they fail, to understand what actually innovation is, and how to develop their innovation policies, and what kind of goals they have, and then how they will achieve these goals, right? They fail actually. Similarly, there are a lot of consultants, experts, they claim expertise, but most of them, not most of them, but sometimes they also fail, right? So So that is why, in social sciences there is no right or wrong process, right? So there is only an appropriate, or a contextual understanding and process. But there are certain things like conceptual frameworks what we have in place, right? And at the same time we have some methodologies, some tools which are developed by different different academics, or policy makers themselves, or consultants, or researchers. So they came up with some kind of a tools and methodologies. So those tools and methodologies we can learn and deploy them to analyze, to develop the policy tools and policies. So this we can do, but we cannot assure that this will bring success to any policy. That's the key to understanding policy and policy making, because this is not a hard science, right? So where you can get an insight based on the experiment, right? In a lab experiment you can get insight, and then you can prove that this is right, this is wrong after the experiment is experiment is done. So in social sciences, the hypothesis formation, I'm not sure how many people how many of you understand what is hypothesis. So maybe I think one suggestion is you should attend. There is a Nalanda lecture is happening on research methodologies. I think you guys should attend that and understand these methodologies, right? So how hypothesis is formed, right, formulated, and how research process is done, because every project is research oriented. Without research you cannot bring evidence. If you can't bring evidence, you cannot formulate policy, because formulation of policy means you need to understand what people want, right? So what is public opinion? Because we understand, right, we understood from previous classes, policy making is nothing but what people want, what is people's interest, right? It's in people's interest, it's in interest of people, where governments make policies to achieve public purpose, right? So that's why they are elected. Either they are elected, or they are there is some different processes in different political systems. So in democratically elected governments, they have a different way of understanding public opinion. So the public opinion shapes the policy, right? So that is what shapes policy making. So that's why it is important to understand, if you want to understand public opinion, of course you need to conduct research, right? You need to first you need to come up with hypothesis, in the sense a general perception, notions, right? So there are some notions that whether is this say, let's say innovation brings employment. That's a hypothesis, right? So unless you test it by conducting research, by conducting surveys, you will not know whether innovation really brings growth, employment or not. Similarly, innovation bring growth, GDP growth? So these questions can be answered only by bringing evidence from the field, which is society, right? So where people are affected by these policies. So that's why policy, digital innovation policy also goes through similar public policy making process. So how this process happen? These are the steps, right? So these are some of the this is called cycle, because it is not a linear fashion in the sense it doesn't happen one after another, and then once you have implemented the policy, and it doesn't end there, right? So your job is not finished as a policy maker, or as a politician, or as a legislator. So your job is not finished there. Or even an institution, right? You are heading Niti Aayog, or you are an analyst in Niti Aayog. So then you need to go beyond implementation of the policy, because there is a fallacy, right? So there is a myth basically. So there is a notion or myth that once you implement the policy, you are done with the policy making, and there ends the policy making, that particular policy making, and then you move to other policy. No, it doesn't happen that way, because it is cyclical, in the sense it is like a cycle, right? So once you set so you identify first problem. So what exactly you want, if it is a digital innovation policy, then these questions you have to answer. So whether this policy, what kind of goals it should have. So in the sense, so you have to identify first what problem. Let's say in India, the problem is unemployment, right? So the high unemployment among youth, that is first biggest problem. And second is independent knowledge production, in the sense we don't have our own scientific approach where we can produce science in the sense the high the original science, and based on science you develop technology and innovation. Basically that's how the processes, knowledge production processes. So if you want to have certain such a strong innovation processes in India, so you need to first develop. We have seen that, right? So we have to first develop our scientific research institutes, and within the institutes we need to develop scientific infrastructure. So which means actually the labs and other resources, and even for students, for faculty, everybody, right? So you need a lot of resources to conduct to carry out scientific studies. So once you come up with scientific discoveries, those discoveries will pave way for application of those scientific discoveries, right, in the social field and economic field, so that then you can reap the benefit of those technologies, basically. Because the difference between science and technology is, science is basically, it explains what it is, right? So if you are talking about space, right, the space is basically, space is unexplored territory. So you want to explore and see what it is, and whether it is possible to, for human life there, or any life there for that matter. So, and is there water in outer space in some of the planets? So this is basically a hypothesis, and then you conduct, an exploration. So that is a scientific process. This is a science project, right? So, but once you, when you are doing exploration, you come up with some, some creative ideas or new ideas that, that the satellites can be used, to capture communication technology, especially spectrum, right? So the radio waves can be captured, and certain frequency we can develop communication infrastructure, and we can develop telecommunication technologies. So this technology is developed because you have you have conducted scientific experiments. So technology succeeds scientific research. So then from technology, then application, right? It's application in the economic or commercial or social field. So whether this technology is useful for people or not. So if it is useful, how do we apply it for our normal life? So this process is a kind of a science technology innovation, right? So that's how science technology innovation as a policy segment or a policy field, it has evolved in this way. So in India, if you want a strong science technology innovation policy, then you need to have all the ingredients what it requires, which means actually you need to have a concerted policy formulation. For that, what you need to do is you need to set your agenda. So what is policy agenda? Policy agenda is nothing but what you want to achieve from formulating or developing this policy, right? So then once you know what is the problem or what you want to achieve, then you design, right? So how do you design? Then once you know you form the hypothesis, that's why I am asking you to go to the research class so that you will understand what is hypothesis. Hypothesis is nothing but a gut feeling, right? So based on certain evidence. In the sense, you don't do hard research, go and then collect the data, but by observation, by normal observations, you will understand there are certain things you need. So that is called, then you start questioning it, whether it is true or not, based on, your observation. Because observations, all our observations don't come true, right? So they are not really a fact-based truth, because they lack evidence, right? They are only observations. So because they are all anecdotal, because you have seen few instances, then you form that hypothesis. Basically, this could be this, So now you need to do a research to make your hypothesis stronger. In the sense, there should be some kind of a evidence to back your hypothesis. So for that, you need to conduct a policy research. In the sense, what is your goal? Your goal is science technology policy, to formulate science, technology, and innovation policy. For that, how do you do a research? Then you go to different, different actors. In the sense, you first you understand what others are doing, right? So in the global setup, like because we are a developing country, we are not, we have not started this, somebody else has started this. So we go and then see what others are doing, like US, what the US science and technology policy looks like, what European technologies, science, technology, innovation policy looks like, or Japanese, or Chinese, or even Korean. So how their policy looks like, right? So and then once you understand that, then you come here to the domestic environment. Domestic environment, when I say, it's Indian ecosystem, where you see your institutions, your government structure, your political environment, and your economy, strength of your economy, how much resources you have, and how much we are spending, because that's one criteria, right? So how much we are spending as percent of GDP. We have seen that slide, right? So in the last class we saw the slide where which country is spending how much money or resources as part of their GDP on research and development. That is one parameter. Similarly, you do this kind of a research and analysis, and then you come up with, there is a problem because we don't spend enough money on research and development, and we don't have enough STEM graduates. STEM in the sense, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, right? So these students, we don't have many students. So if we don't have many students, you will not have many researchers, because they are the ones who will go on to study PhDs, and then they become either professors or scientists or researchers, and they are the ones who bring out the scientific discoveries, and then develop technologies, and even implement some of the projects, technological and innovation projects, engineering projects. So they are the ones who are the human resources, right? Human capital. We need to do that. So to develop all this, you need to have certain direction, right? So otherwise, how will you do it if you don't have a direction, a guidance, right? So how will you do that? So how you can, because it's not even if we want to do something for individually, we plan, right? We plan ahead. So if we have to invest something, so how do we invest? How much we have money, and then where it should go? If we invest this much, what is the return we are going to get? That is what we are going to see. That's a plan, right? Similarly, the science, technology, innovation policy also looks at that, right? So how, if I want to reap the benefit of innovation, what should I do? How much I have to invest in research and development, in talent development, that is human capital development. That means basically how much, how many scientists we need. So for that, how many institutions we need. So if you need in this many institutions, how much I have to put money into that, so that the facilities can be improved, and the scientific research can be conducted there, without much problems. So all this can be part of this policy agenda. And the other agenda is policy agenda, because this is not the only policy agenda, right? So because you are living in a large society where there are hundreds of millions of people are there, right? So 1.3 billion people are there. And then these people, they are not just are one entity. They are social groups, right? So they also work as groups, in the sense there are hierarchical one side, they are also horizontal in certain cases. So there are divisions, there are there is some kind of we have different diversity, right? So let's say geographical diversity, there are rural areas, urban areas, and there are remote villages, there are hilly areas where the accessibility is not there, and there are also and the caste groups, which are again hierarchically distributed, and there are religious groups. So how do we benefit all this? And then there is also a gender angle to this, right? So because we also have a disparity among men and women, how many they go into the science, and then how many scientists we have, women scientists, men scientists, how many women scientists. So there is a representation issue here, and there are also issues like where we should invest, because if you keep on investing in the same regions, same places, then you will not be able to. Just a second. So we have a question from YouTube, right? So please explain policy design and formulation. So that's what I'm coming to that. So it's basically I am explaining the policy goal. How do you set the agenda? So agenda is set this way, right? So what you need for formulating this policy. Policy design and formulation is the next step. Once you know what you want, then you write it, right? Write it down based on all this, what you have done, the research, what you want. You basically write a document and you document it. That is what policy formulation is. But keeping all this in mind, right? So what is that in mind? Resources, what resources you want, what infrastructure you want, what kind of human capital you want, and how much money is required for this, and and what kind of goals you want to achieve by this, in the sense economic growth and employment and competitiveness of your country. So so if you want to be an export oriented country, right? So you don't want to import everything, so you want to export high value goods like technology, so then you need to have a different kind of a setup. So for that you need different kind of resources. So let's say you are talking about exporting AI technologies, or because we also have IT exports, right? So there are companies like TCS, Infosys, all these, they export IT services, right? So when they export IT services, and we also have product companies who are from outside, from within India, and they come here, they set up their operations here. So when they set up operations, they need people, right, to work with them, and they also need infrastructure to work, and they also need certain kind of a conducive and peaceful environment so that they can conduct the business. That is how this industry evolved. So now if you need all this, then you need to have a policy, right? So to identify what you need to to make these companies more and more, then you need to write down this, right? Somewhere you need to say, this is the document we have prepared, this is we have written down all the points what we need to make India a IT export oriented country. So then you have identified which cities can be a good a suitable geographies. Like let's say Bangalore has become such a big export hub, IT services export hub. Similarly, Hyderabad, Pune. So how did they become? There was a policy, STPI policy, Software Technology Park India, Parks of India policy. So similarly, so you need the policy for innovation also, right? So for innovation policy to bring all the resources to develop this, you need a policy. So formulating is nothing but, in government there are bureaucrats, right? And similarly they also have advisors. So they come up with this plan, basically a plan to how to achieve these goals. So if you want to have more and more entrepreneurs who are innovative venture, who are going to build innovative ventures based on based on a new digital technologies, right? So then what kind of a policy you need? So you write down that. So when government writes down that, that is called policy design, right? Design in the sense what goals should be achieved, that process you write down basically. So the goals is one part only, right? So the formulation is basically entire policy, goals, and process, how you are going to implement. Once you implement, what are the outcomes, in the sense how it is going to benefit and what kind of impact it will make. If once the impact is made, then what are you going to do after that? So that is called policy formulation and design. And who are these people whom you're going to target? So that's also part of the policy formulation and design. So that process happens right after your research and analysis of identifying the problem. So that is the second step. Then what you do, once you have that, then you communicate your policy proposal, in the sense this is actually, formulation is a proposal. So you have made a document and you communicate it to the different stakeholders. Now the stakeholders name has come into the picture, right? So who are these stakeholders? Stakeholders are basically everybody, every citizen, right? So this policy now it's on the website of the government. Like let's say Department of Science and Technology, right? So Ministry of Science and Technology website has now that policy proposal. So now they will ask anybody who wants to give the suggestions. So they will go and write how this policy should be and what are the problems with this policy and what kind of challenges it has, or what is good about it, what is bad about it. So they will write and then they will convey this to the government. So that is called consultative process. So the consultation process is nothing but citizens telling the government about the policy proposal, right? So whether it is good, bad, or what is actually wrong with this, or what is good about it. So that is called consultative process. So in this consultative process, generally what happens is, why this consultation process is important? Because the policies are made for people, so the people should participate in it, right? So that is why consultative processes has come into the place. That is one best practice. But often what happens in the government is, government put up this document on their website, and once they put up the website, most of us don't even know whether this document has come out or existing. Most of the population, most of the people don't know. That is because lack of first awareness. Second is also we have different our own daily life activities where we have to go to the job, and we have to take care of our families, and we have to take care of ourselves, and all this we put a lot of effort in this, and then we don't really give so much importance to these things as a normal people, right? Public. But there are people, we have different set of people who have interest in this, who are funded through different means called NGOs, or civil society organizations, or even think tanks, or sometimes even the corporates, right? So what they do is they write their own position papers. It's called policy position paper. Position paper is nothing but what is your position on this particular policy. It's called policy position paper, right? So this is one of the very important documents, every organization, which are like reasonably big organizations, and the civil society civil society organizations, they have this process called policy position paper writing, right? So once they put up the policy position, government will understand, okay, so the most of the people want these changes. So then they will send it to the committee which is actually trying to formulate this policy. Then they come up with the changes, right? So they make the changes and then they have to adopt it, in the sense they have to give some kind of a form to it, either legal form, which is like a legislative form, in the sense it becomes a legislation or regulation only when it is the parliament or any a decision making body in the political system. Either it could be parliament, upper house and lower house, what we have in India, or it could be a kind of a, like Chinese in China, they have their own system where the people's legislation, so where they produce the document and then it approves. Or sometimes it is not, it doesn't go to parliament, it becomes an executive order, in the sense in a presidential form of government, president approves it and then it becomes an order, or a cabinet, council of cabinet ministers, like what we have in India. So they approve it, and then once they sign it off, and then in the name of cabinet, actually the prime minister takes the decision, who is the leader of the cabinet. So they put up as an order. So this becomes an order, then it gets a legal sanction, right? So it is now a legal document, so that whoever the policy is intended to, it is going to come into effect from that day onwards, as government approves it. Or it could become a directive in the sense it is not a mandatory, but it is a directive, it is a good to do it, right? So that is called directive. So these directives are not mandatory. Like, let's say Aadhaar can be used for certain kinds of activities. Like, let's say recently they were saying voter ID cards have to be linked to, can be linked to Aadhaar card. So this is basically a directive. They are saying this is not mandatory. So that is a different issue how they implement it. But this is called directive. So that is the difference between regulation, legislation, executive order, and directive. So the policies are adopted in this fashion, right? So either they made it regulation, so that a regulatory body like Reserve Bank of India or department or TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, or IRD, Insurance Regulatory Development Authority. So these kind of regulatory bodies, they issue a regulation to concerned parties. So from that day onwards, that particular regulatory, that particular segment of actors, like let's say if it is a TRAI regulation, then all the telecom companies and the telecom users, they will have to comply with this regulation. Similarly, if RBI gives regulation, then this regulation has to be complied with by all the banks and the bank users, customers of the bank, consumers of the bank, banking services. So this is called a adoption of the policy, because policy doesn't come into effect unless you give some kind of a legal or constitutional legitimacy to this, right? It becomes legitimate in the sense it becomes valid, right, in the eyes of the law. So you can actually, if somebody deviates from this, you can go and challenge this in the court of the law. That's why it is adoption. Its adoption is important, right? So then once you adopt it, then you have to communicate this. Yes, there is such a policy. So we have adopted this policy. So from now onwards, this will be implemented for a certain duration, or it will be effect from today onwards. You have to communicate that. Once you communicate this will come into effect. And then certain things are actively implemented. Certain things are just, they are there as a document, so you have to follow them. So that's the difference between different kinds of implementation processes, right? So then once it is implemented, then you have to monitor it. So what do you do? Monitoring in the sense, once the policy is implemented, so you have to see how this policy is implemented, whether this is giving intended benefits, in the sense the goal setting, right? The first point, whether this is achieving the goals what we are setting, the agenda what we wanted to achieve. Is this policy achieving or not? This, to do that, you need to continuously monitor it, right? So then you need to have a metric for that, in the sense you have to measure, right? How do you evaluate it? So you monitor it, but there should be also a way to understand, right? So whether it is working or not. So how do you do that? So you need to put some metrics in the sense it should be a measurable one. So where you put some ranking, rating, or some quantification. So then you evaluate this policy. Once you evaluate, then whether it is effective or not effective. If it is not effective, what do? You have to change it, right? If it's not effective, you want to improve it, then you have to reform or you change it. Once you do reform or change, then it becomes the same again, iterative loop. It will go into the iterative loop, and then it follows the same process. Because if you make any changes, then you have to again conduct a research, because you understand there is a problem. If you identify a problem, then you need to see whether this problem is has evidence, right? So it should be evidence based. So then once you find the evidence, then if there is a really problem, then you have to change it. If you want to change it, then you have to design again new policy, right? So that is what the new innovation, science, technology, innovation policy, what we are seeing, the new one, it is actually from the previous one. They want to improve it. So that is why they have brought new one. So this process is called public policy cycle, right? So every policy goes through this cycle. So in this, the central, element of component of this process is stakeholder, because stakeholder are target audience. We call it policy audience. Who are this policy audience? Policy audience is the intended, the policy whom it is targeted to, right? So like most of the times it's a common public, or certain times it's companies, if it is a regulation, or it is sometimes it is a it is certain interest groups, right? So it is certain interest groups. They want to improve their lives, or they want to bring certain changes. Like let's say there is a new education policy, right? It doesn't affect everyone in the same way. It affects students in a major way. It impacts, and then parents. Then if you are not studying and then you don't have kids, you are already into it, you have finished your studies, and you don't have children who are not going to the school, and then you are not impacted the way the way who are actually consuming these services, right? The education services, who are attaining education, right? The students and their parents. So the way they are impacted, others are not impacted. So that is why every policy has its own target audience. So that's why it is a centered, because it runs across all the elements of policy cycle, right? So each component is addressed to the policy target audience, right? See this, right? So this is the policy. This is the most important one. This is what we are going to talk about now, right? So the next slide, let's go to the next slide. This is another problem. Okay, great. So now let's see the, yeah. So we talked about ecosystem and we talked about stakeholders. So how does this ecosystem work, right? So who are these ecosystem players? Basically, when we talk about digital innovation ecosystem, who are these players? So this is how it looks like, right? If you map the ecosystem, So the mapping is this. So you have an ecosystem, innovation ecosystem. If you want to draw in, this is just I drew a kind of indicative one. So these are the major stakeholders, right? So you have government, which is actually making the innovation policy, and you have research institutes and universities, higher education, who basically participate in doing research and conducting experiments, and then bringing the technology bringing the technology, and then offering the students the place to do research, and the professors and scientists to do the research. So they are another important stakeholder in this. And similarly, you also have the influencers, right? There are so many influencers, like international actors like World Bank, IMF, and UN bodies, and other multilateral agencies like Asian Development Bank and European Union, and development agencies from different countries, like AFD of French Development Agency, Swiss Development Agency, and UK's Development Agency, and US Aid, which is again US Development Action Aid. There is another one. So these actors, all they influence different kind of policies by writing their own papers, their own ideas they propose to different governments. So the governments get influenced by these international actors. And similarly, there are consultants like McKinsey, like Deloitte, PwC. They also write a lot of reports on these policies, right? So how a business should evolve, how innovation ecosystem should evolve, how digital economy should evolve. They write. So this also a kind of, see, once you write something and then put it in the public domain, so people will read it, right? So people read it and then they get ideas. Once they get ideas, they get influenced by this, and then they start implementing some of them, right, into their policy. They adopt into their policy design. So these actors influence the policy, but they are not part of the policy making, right? So policy making is generally a government domain. So it's a domain of the state, operators or government. And you also have others who influence, right? So like media, think tanks, lobbyists. Like media is one of the important influencers, because they take all the opinions, whether you journalistic opinions, or somebody has done some research, and then it comes into the media. And then media, we all read newspapers, we all read different media outlets on web these days. So we consume a lot, and then we also get influenced by this. Like as a policymaker or analyst, you also get influenced if you are into that. And similarly, there are other actors, right? So the business actors, like companies, startups, accelerators in the sense, so who help actually startups to become big, to scale, right? Scale into a big startup, from a small startup to become a big one. They help, these accelerators. They accelerate the growth. That's why they are called accelerators. And I think you might be knowing every state has its own, government accelerators also these days. Some of them, not every state. Like Telangana has a T-Hub, right? So similarly, I think even Punjab has one, and Delhi has one. Similarly, there are other private accelerators like Y Combinator. There is one. So Microsoft has its own, accelerators, and then they help startups to grow into big scale, right? So similarly, you have big companies like all these MNCs, and even domestic companies like Indian companies. They also influence this, and not only influence, they actively go and then represent to the government, right? They give a representation saying that we want this certain changes in the policy, or when you are starting a new policy, you consider these things, because the businesses get benefited by this, and then we are the ones who give the employment to large section of the population. So in reality, it may be different, but that is in general, that's how the representation is made, from the companies, big companies, to the government. And these days, these companies have public policy, professionals on their in their organizations, and they also have government affairs professionals, right? So who are specialized in the in public policy, and then they advise them, and they conduct relationship between between the government and the company. So they become a liaison officers basically. So this is a very common. This has become a common and popular practice among big businesses. Similarly, there are funding actors, right? So the funding actors are, you have a venture capitalists, you have banks, you have private equity firms, you have angel funds. Angel funds are nothing but, they are not a company, but they are people, right? So the individual coming up with his own investment or her own investment, right? Individuals, their individual investments, they invest in startups. They are called angels, basically. So angel investors, they are called. Similarly, civil society NGOs, we also talked about it, right? So they are the ones who participate in the consultative process, right? They also try to influence the government decisions. Sometimes they influence in a positive way, and at least intention is, positive. Sometimes they also, they also have different interests. So because every actor has its own interest, we have to understand this, right? So when we are making the policy making is not just a government domain. That's what, this with this slide I would like to emphasize on that. The emphasis is that every stakeholder has some influence, some interest, and some impact. So that is why, policy making is not just one act of participation. It doesn't happen with one act of participation. So it happens with all other actors, right? So apart from the government, there are so many actors who participate in this process. That's what I want to drive this point home, right? Sorry. So if you guys have any questions, or if you don't understand anything, even if you don't understand anything also, zero you understood, then also please try to, put the message or try to speak up, so that, I can explain you again. Even if it is possible in Hindi, I will try to explain it. And please do tell me whether you understand or not. Otherwise, it's very difficult for me to understand whether you guys are, on the same page or not, right? So please tell me now, so that, it's like we'll take a pause here, and then we will see what you understand about the policy cycle and the stakeholders. So what you didn't understand, what you understood, I want to know now. So anyone else want to ask anything, or they didn't understand anything? Okay, so which part when did you have you seen the slide in policy cycle? Satyam, both. So hi Satyam, so have you seen the last slide? So if you have seen the, okay, great. But if you have seen the last slide, if you understood the last slide, then that is where, the most of the important components we discussed. If you don't understand anything in the last slide, then let me know, so that, I can explain you again. Yeah, this slide. So if you guys have understood this slide, then we will move ahead, right? Yeah, okay. So you have taken this, but if you don't have any, if you don't understand anything, or if you have any question, please write here, or you can mail me also. Okay. Yeah. Let's move ahead then. Good. So let's see how, the analysis is done, right? So once the policy is formulated, and and we know there is a document, and we have implemented, and we want to know now, how this will impact, right? So not implemented, but we have designed the policy, and now we want to know how it will impact. So generally policy, any policy, not only policy, even the projects, right? So every project will have audience, right? Target audience, who are like stakeholders. In the sense, we are doing any social sciences, or policy project, will have people involved in this. So because we are our intention is to improve something, or to work for certain public purpose or certain interest group we want to impact, right? So there is some impact, economic or social impact or political impact we want to see. That's why we conduct projects, or we conduct policy, we formulate policies. So when we formulate policies in the early stages itself, in the sense once we set the agenda and once we have a document, then what you do is once you you have a goal, actually whom you are going to target, right? So let's say STI, science technology innovation policy, right, which we have you all have access to now. India's new science technology innovation policy, it's already uploaded in the on the portal. Maybe you also have in your mails. So you go through that, and then you see how because they talk about a lot of groups, right? So stakeholders, and they talk about different groups, how they want to bring representation, and they want to diversify, and then they want to include everybody. So what are these all are stakeholders, basically. One. Second, they also talk about research institutes and universities. They also talk about companies, businesses, how to promote innovation among private enterprise, right? So how they can bring more innovation to the society. So that is also one of the key aspect in the document. And there are certain challenges with that. The limitations of there are limitations and challenges with the document. So that we will discuss in the next in the next stage. So now let's see how we will take the document as it is, and we will just see how who are these stakeholders and how it will impact, right? So usually, the stakeholder analysis has to be conducted in the early phase of the policy formulation. In the sense, once you have this goal, then you identify who are your stakeholders, right? So here stakeholders are all these we have seen just now. Who are the stakeholders? Like, let's say, yeah, these are the stakeholders now. So now how you think all these stakeholders are going to get impacted, right? So now you cannot have, everybody is not impacted in the same way. And similarly, everybody doesn't have the same interest or influence over this policy, right? So there are some actors who are directly impacted, and similarly they have a direct influence. So the policy is analyzed on two fronts. One is influence, and other is interest or impact, right? What is influence and power here? So when we say influence and power, a group of stakeholders or a stakeholder segment who has considerable clout or considerable power or power to influence the policy, right? So if they want to, or if they intend to change the policy, they have the power to change it, and they have power to even force government to withdraw the policy. So that is called power and influence. And similarly, the actors who has power to make government adopt a policy, in the sense formulate a new policy, or change the policy or withdraw the policy. So all this is possible for somebody who has such power and influence in the society, right? So they become they are one type of stakeholders. There are other type of stakeholders who gets impacted, who have interest in the policy, but they don't have power to influence or to change, to make or force government to adopt or withdraw the policy, right? So now, if this is how the policies are because this is how the social order is, right? So it is not that it's like this is how it should be, but this is how it is. But what it should be, that should be different, right? So the most impacted one has to also have power. That is the idea of any of the social science endeavor. In the sense, when we study social sciences, there is a there is a moral obligation, right? So as a student of social sciences, or as a policy maker, or as a citizen, even as normal citizen, right, we have moral obligation that the most impacted one of the policy should also have a lot of influence, right? Because if it impacts them, they should have power to change it, or to make a new policy, or make a withdraw, because if it is impacting them negatively. So that's why we need this matrix actually helps us to analyze that, whether who has what. So now if you take STI policy, who are these high influence power, who has, and who has high impact on whom it has, right? So these two high, that is actually called, we call them primary actors, right? So primary stakeholders there. So they are primary stakeholders at one aspect, and they are also direct stakeholders, in the sense it is impacting them directly. So that is why they are called primary stakeholders and direct stakeholders. So when they have when they have such influence and such impact, then it's not a big problem. But the problem comes here with the stakeholders who have high interest, in the sense high impact and very low influence. That is the biggest problem in policy. It's a policy challenge, how it impacts the stakeholder. So now if that is what is happening with someone, so somebody has a very high impact, like the fourth quadrant, right? So the extreme right lower column, right? So that is the latents, they are called. So they have become secondary, in the sense they are secondary, they're direct, in the sense they have a high impact but low influence. So now the policy makers, once they do the analysis, who are they have to identify them, and then they have to make them, they have to move them to the next column. That is basically, either you take out the impact so that they are not impacted negatively, if negatively they are impacted, and or you give them power and empower them, right? And then bring them to the different quadrant. That quadrant could be a primary one, who are like high primary promoters, we call it promoters because they have the power, so they can promote this policy. Or you make them defenders, so they are actually primary ones and the direct ones, so that they defend this policy and they become a part of this policy. They participate in it and then they defend it. So then you empower them and then bring them to that quadrant. That's how this policy matrix, right, stakeholder analysis matrix work. So this is basically to give us a sense how different stakeholders are impacted and what kind of power they have. So based on that, we classify them in different groups. Once you classify them, then put them into a quadrant, so that it's like it becomes clear for us as a policy maker or analyst to understand what impact it has, and then what kind of power it has on certain groups. Then you make changes to the policy to reduce this, right? So this is one process of one way of analyzing stakeholders. So this is very important aspect of policy making. So analyzing the stakeholder, mapping, identifying, mapping, and analyzing them, right? So and their role, analyzing their role. So this is what I want you guys to do it, right? So I saw only one submission, but I think I expect you guys to do this kind of analysis and submit. Maybe next week, same Saturday, or Saturday is a class. So before that, if you could submit, then it'd be great. Okay, so you make this kind of analysis. and then come up with your own idea who should be where, and then who should have a more influence, and then it is one, right? So you can actually move, in the sense you make first one chart, and then you make another chart, move them from where to where they should go, which quadrant to which quadrant who should go, like general public, right? Or students should be students. If students are in the latents in the first quadrant, then you should move them to the next quadrant. What should you do? You should empower the students, in the sense you need to have a student governments in universities, and then you have a consultative process within the universities, and then universities can engage with the policy makers in government, so that these policies are actually changed based on the inputs given from taken from the students. Similarly, the universities also are one of them, right? So they don't have much power and influence, but they are impacted by the policy. Similarly, if you take companies, they may not be impacted so much, they may moderately impacted, but they have high influence and power because of the resources they have. Similarly, some of media houses, right? Media is not impacted so much, but they have a high influential power. So basically this combination of things, right? So which actually play out and give certain actors more power, certain actors less power. So this has to be balanced. So to balance that, a policy maker or policy analyst or policy consultant has to suggest this process of moving one set of stakeholders from one quadrant to another quadrant, so that they get empowered. They also have a less negative impact on them because of this policy. This is called stakeholder analysis. This is how stakeholder analysis is conducted. So now you tell me if you have any doubts and questions, because this is little complex. So, but this is, I assume this is not very complex, but little complex. But you guys, if you have any questions, let's pause and take the questions and then move on. Yeah, no questions. Shall we move ahead then? Is it possible stakeholders have high impact and also influence? Yes, they do. Certain cases. Let's take an example of innovation itself, right? So in India, let's say in an Indian case, let's take Indian case. So if you see Indian ecosystem, right? So who are most powerful actors? So generally, businesses, right? So the businesses, in the sense, one is startups, and second is large businesses, and there are also other businesses like small and medium scale businesses. There are three kinds of businesses are there. So three are not impacted in the same way, right? So the startup, they don't have, some of the startups don't have much funding. So then they get impacted if there is a tax, right? So if you are coming up with, let's say government has come up with a new tax policy within the innovation policy. Let's say, the innovation is not working. Let's tax, these entrepreneurs who are getting more funding, right? So then what happens is they get negatively impacted, but at the same time they're also highly influential, right? So because of their the ecosystem they have built, the startups today, the startups demand certain things, and they get fulfilled because of the influence they have, because there is a perceived notion among both governments and the government and even the policy ecosystem, right? So the overall policy bureaucracy and the legislators, media, everybody is sympathetic towards this whole startup ecosystem, because we celebrate the unicorns. We celebrate there are many startups which are successful, so the successful stories we celebrate. So because of this positive notion, they have certain leverage, in the sense certain influence over the policy, because they demand certain things from the government. Those demands are fulfilled by the government. That is precisely because of what there is a perceived notion that the startups brings innovation, growth, and high employment, right? So because they are going to employ large number of people, into the startup ecosystem. So this is one policy narrative, right? So the another policy narrative is they bring new growth, right? So the old economy is not able to grow anymore. So the digital startups are going to disrupt the old economy, and then they bring a new growth in new sectors. That is another narrative what we see. And third narrative is these startups also bring solutions to the social challenges. Let's say financial inclusion, right? So the fintech firms, like payments have become very easy for us to pay anybody through a mobile phone. So this is because of startup ecosystem what we have. The fintech startups, they have come up with different technology offerings, like payment gateways, like the payment interfaces, like Paytm or UPay, whatever. All these companies, they have made our lives easy, right? So to pay from anywhere, from without much cost, without incurring much cost, without much infrastructure. You don't need anything, right? You don't have to go anywhere. You just sit at home or wherever in office. You just do it from your mobile. And certain things like ride hailing apps, right? Ride hailing is basically your Uber, right? Ola. You don't have to book your cab, and then you don't have to wait for it. You just come out, and then you just hail for a cab, and then it comes to your location based on the geolocation tag, right? So because of the advanced technology what we have in the mapping, geolocation maps. So because of the Google Maps and the other maps, which is an innovation, so that that Uber has adopted it, and then today they have made a successful business model out of it. But this narratives gives them that power, because they are bringing new jobs, especially in the new technologies, because they are high value jobs, right? So once you have high value jobs, then you pay high taxes to the government. The government gets revenues, right? So, and then you also spend more. This is one it's a neoliberal, neoclassical economics, right? So see, here again I want to make one request, right? So if it is possible for you guys, you take the economics class from Nalanda, Digital Nalanda, and research methodology. These two are important, and even if it is possible, law, these three are important if you want to understand, the public policy better. If you want to become a really public policy professional, and especially in a technology innovation or digital innovation policy, you want to study later on, you want to become an expert, or if you want to become an academic or researcher, then I would request you guys to take these three classes, so that it's like it will be beneficial for you to comprehend what I'm talking, right? So when I say neoclassical economics, you will be able to relate it to if you do the classes from economics, because there are concepts they are teaching, right? So that's why I would request you to do that. So from that perspective, these all are bring positive positive activities to economy, right? So it will impact positively overall economy. That is the idea what we have regarding startup ecosystem. So they are impacted, but at the same time they're also influential. That is why I'm talking about the particular example, right? So similarly, there are others. Let's say taxes, corporate tax, right? So they are impacted, but they are also very highly influential, right? Corporate tax. So that's why government has reduced the corporate tax. Otherwise, tax policy was, we had some 33 or 36% corporate tax, but now it is reduced to, I think, that 27 or 30 or 33, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure, but you check it out. So they have reduced in the last 1 year, right? So last 1 or 2 years, they have reduced the corporate tax. So this shows us If you are impacted, if you are also highly influential, then you can make changes to the policies. Similarly, farmer protest, right? So the new farm laws, what happened with that? So they didn't have so much power, influence. So government did not did not relent. In the sense, government did not accept their demands, farmer demands, for almost a year. They just sat down and then they wanted government to listen to them. Government was not ready to discuss the matter with them, with the farmers. But finally government had to heed because of the elections or whatever the reasons, political reasons. So the politics is always influenced by the policies. Policies are influenced by the politics. So both are, they are interrelated and interdependent. So when a policy is made, keeping different actors in mind. But the most impacted sometimes are not, given them given the due, what you said, the due attention, right? So it was not paid due attention in the policy formulation. So when it is not paid, then they lose their power, they lose their influence. Then they have to resort to these political tactics. It is tactic, right? So it's a political tactic. Is one is resistance, and in a democracy you have a right to express your resentment, express your your displeasure through protest. So these protests will bring changes in the policy. So but companies won't protest, right? So we never saw companies protesting, right? So that is because they have so much power and influence, they just go and talk, and governments always listen to them because they have money. The money influences politics, right? So it's that's how the political economy works, in a neoliberal framework. So the politics and economy, which is an intersection called political economy, right? So the political economy works in this way. So that is why we need policies more participative, more citizen centric, right? So more people centric, and which are serving the public purpose. So that's why we need the policies which are designed and formulated with a citizen at the center, who is a stakeholder, and the common man who is who is also a stakeholder. And common man in the sense, not every policy won't impact everyone, right? So in the sense, like, let's say an education policy or a science and technology policy impacts student, but student don't have power. So but they have to be empowered. So that is the idea of policy, stakeholder analysis. Yeah. And let's see the next slide. So the next slide is basically to give you an idea, right? So the from the policy, innovation policy today, has a new framework. So that framework is called quadruple helix innovation. We talked about this, right? The knowledge production modes, right? So the one is mode 1, mode 2, mode 3. So in the beginning, in the first two classes, we discussed about these 3 modes of knowledge production. So knowledge production mode 1 is basically university driven. So where research institutes and the universities come up with scientific experiments and the scientific research, and then those research basically becomes inventions. Those inventions become patents becomes application and commercialized, and they become finally they get into the social field or economic field and becomes businesses, right? So that is a first mode of the knowledge production. And the mode 2 is basically, in the mode 2, universities collaborate with either another actor, mostly private actors, and they both come together and they produce inventions and innovations. Similarly, they may do it with government. That is mode 2. Mode 3 is basically more complex in nature, where more actors come together to carry out innovations. So that is called this quadruple helix innovation. Quadruple in the sense, see, there are triple helix. First it was double helix. So it is actually corresponding to your knowledge production mode. So they also have this double helix is basically 2 actors coming together to produce innovations. Similarly, triple helix is basically three actors coming. So who are those three actors? Mostly, academic, industry, and government earlier. But now the quadruple is basically citizen is, included. Earlier, citizen was always, impacted party. Always, he used to receive the policy, but he or she, citizen never had a role to play in policy making. In the sense, they never had an active participation, citizens. But today, the most of the policy processes now advocate for citizen participation. Otherwise, it loses legitimacy, because citizen is more aware today, and they have more communication tools to understand what policy making is and how policy is impacted. So that is why, the governments want to make citizen a participant in the innovation policy process, right? So that is why we have this quadruple helix innovation model. Okay. So this with this we have another slide. So now all these actors, stakeholders we talked about how they influence, how they are impacted. But there are other things we need to it doesn't matter you have all these frameworks, everything but in place, but it doesn't mean they are all they all happen and they all achieve the goals of the participatory and inclusive, responsible, sustainable innovation goals. So to achieve that, you need certain certain tools, right? Certain processes, certain tools, systems in place. So some of them are these processes, right? So one is participatory policy development, in a sense. So you same like the quadruple innovation quadruple helix innovation model, right? So what we have seen, so where participatory in the sense, so you bring people, citizens also inside the policy making by consulting them, by offering them a space where they can also discuss. In the sense, the policy becomes more of a local in nature, because in India, if you see, the policies are made at the center, right? So in the union government makes the policy, and it communicates to different states, and the states adopt it, right? And there is no active engagement from the citizen unless there is a negative impact is already felt by the citizen, and then they express their resentment and the protest. Then only this process happens. Otherwise, most of the times the policy is simply thrown at the citizen, right? So the consultative process, right? So where citizen is participatory element, that is somehow ignored and neglected in policy development process in most of the developing countries. But in developed countries, this element is paid more attention, right? So today participatory policy development is one of the key ingredient in European Union's policy making mechanism, right? Policy development is one set, right? The implementation and the cycle, right? So what we have seen, monitoring, evaluation, implementation, and then you change the policy, and then again you do a iterative process, right? This iterative process is called governance, right? So because you just don't see the policy is implemented, but you also see actively, you monitor, you evaluate, and then you make the changes, and then you again come up with a new policies. So this is all in a framework this happens, right? So there is a legislative framework which actually mandates this process, and there is also a legal processes where the law governs it, right? So certain standards, certain regulations, certain guidelines are provided to different actors who participate in innovation policy, or in this innovation, not policy but innovation process, right? So the like businesses and like citizens and the users, consumers, and think tanks, media, everyone. So for all of them, you develop some standards, you develop certain how to act responsibly, how to make the digital innovation. When I talk to this policy here, we are talking about digital innovation policy, right? So digital innovation policy, more inclusive, more sustainable, and more responsible way how you implement it. So for that, you need to have all the institutions, participating in it first. And second is, you also need some standards, regulations, and ethical frameworks, to abide by that, right? So that is one. And second is, there is also multi-stakeholder consultation, the way we discussed just now, right? So all the stakeholders you bring together, and you ask their concerns, their positions, and then you take them into considerations while you are formulating the policy. That is one aspect of policy making these days. Most of these international bodies like World Bank, UN, they propose this multi-stakeholder consultation process and multi-stakeholder governance process, right? And co-creation and of policy and governance process. This is a new variety of a governance process, where co-creation, in the sense, you don't just only participate, but you are involved. You are not participating as a just giving the suggestions and just making the opinions heard, but you also participate from the beginning, in the sense, setting the agenda itself. Before setting the agenda, you are as a citizen, you participate in it. So in the sense, you are creating the policy, and you are also creating the governance process. In the sense, you are also part of the governance. In the sense, if there is a regulation, the regulation has to be enforced. Then citizen also is taken into consideration in the enforcement process. So that is co-creation, right? Together you create this whole thing, right? So there is again open innovation policy frameworks, so which are basically, anybody can participate in it. It is open to everyone, in the sense, like, let's say, you put the policy document on Twitter, or idea on Twitter or Facebook, because these all are available tools today, and then you ask them suggestions, and then you ask them to come up with their own policy document, and then you source them, right? Crowdsourcing. You source them from different places, and then you take the best out of it. So which are the most popular ones. So there's this. So these all are some of the processes what we have today, and where at a different levels, in different geographies or countries, they are implemented. Like, let's say, in Europe, the most of these things are already in place, right? So open innovation is in place. Co-creation is, people are talking about it, but still it's in the nascent stage, in the sense it's early stage of implementation. Multi-stakeholder process is there across the globe now, even in India. Participatory is, again, it should be at a local level, but we don't have much in the local policy making in India. So most of the policy making is centralized in India, unfortunately. And one most important thing, right? So what we were talking about, inclusive, representative, and diversity, right? So in the assignment also I talked about it, right? So please come up with what is how this government tries to tackle this issue, inclusive and diversity and inclusion, right? See, there is a fundamental problem in the document. I'm talking from my point of view, right? So you all have your own opinions, so you should come up with those opinions, right? So see, from my point of view, the document talks about all we will bring we will give representation. We also give it will be inclusive, and diversity we will maintain. We will give equal opportunity to everyone. That's what it says. But it doesn't say, nowhere it says what is the process, right? So how they're going to do it, right? So have you seen anywhere in the document? If you have read, I'm not sure whether you have read, please read it, because it's a nice exercise to do it. It's you will know how the policies are documented, right? So how they are, basically how you can analyze it, right? So once you go through this presentation and then read it, then come back and again you read it. If you don't understand anything, let's discuss, right? So let's discuss, and then we will have a more interactive sessions, and then more fruitful discussions, if you have if you have read it. Otherwise it doesn't make sense, right? So if you don't read it and then simply listening, it doesn't make sense. So in this document, it talks about caste, it talks about religion, it talks about gender, but it only emphasis is more on gender, right? So gender, it talks about gender, saying that how they want to improve the gender balance, right? In the imbalance in India, gender imbalance in science, technology, innovation, innovation setup environment. So they want to give more representation to women. That's a great point. Every society should strive for it, right? So more representation, equal representation should be there. Almost, it's like it should be based on the population percentage, right? So if you 50%, 50, we have almost 50-50 now, right? 49, maybe 49 point something, right? The female population to male is something like 900 and plus. We have for every 1,000 males, females we have. So similarly, your innovation policy also should, strive to maintain that diversity, right? From a gender perspective. But there are other social identities, because gender is not the only social identity what we have in India. We have caste, we have religion, we have disability, people with disabilities, we have indigenous communities who are basically live in remote places, or don't have access to opportunities and don't have access to infrastructure. So how you are going to bring them into this process, this innovation, how innovation is going to benefit them? So where is that process, how you're going to benefit them? You have not detailed it. In the sense, I mean to say, government has not detailed, they don't have a detailed plan how to bring it. They only mention about it, everybody. So the policy also has to have specificities, right? So it cannot have just only generic, it is for all. So it's not, this is not the policy is not a, is not a dawat, right? So arm dawat, like you come and then participate. So it is not that. So policy should have a strict, specific guidance, right? So how you're going to do it. So if you do that, then only your policy will have which stakeholder, how you are going to target, and then who is, the way we saw that, right? Who are impacted, what kind of influence they have. So if you are not talking about the people who are impacted, how you are going to bring them into the innovation process, if you don't talk about that, then what kind of policy agenda you have set for yourself, and then what kind of target audience you are, what kind of audience you are targeting with your policy is a big question mark, right? So these things, we need to critically analyze. So the government policy, has a serious limitation and challenge in this. It's a serious lacuna. The same thing in the US, it cannot happen, right? So in US, racial identities are very strong and very explicit, right? So government policies always have taken into this, they have adopted into their policy making, right? So they will ensure that not every policy, there are a lot of lapses and limitations and challenges, but at least now there is a new a new awakening. At least there is in a policy world, how we give equal opportunities and access to the communities who are historically did not have access to the knowledge production, to the spaces of higher education, to the spaces of research, to the spaces of innovation, to the spaces of startup ecosystem, to the spaces of think tanks. So all these influences your policy making. Not only influences, but they are also going to play a very important role in every part of startup ecosystem, the ecosystem what we have seen, right? So the government, media, everywhere the representation should be there in every sphere. Then only you will have the ideas from everyone. Then only it becomes a more inclusive policy. If you don't give them that opportunity when you are making the policy, first of all, and second is you are not addressing the policy also, how this is going to help the people who are not getting benefited from the innovation policies for long a period of time in our history. If you don't address this challenge, then the policy, in my eyes, it's failed. So that is why I ask you, from your perspective, what do you think, how this policy should address this topic in diversity and inclusion? The chapter 7, I think, if I'm not wrong, that is the chapter, they deal with it in the document. So please pay attention to it and come up with your own ideas, right? So what are the best ways to bring them, first, to make the policy? How do they ensure the representation while making the policy, formulating the policy, and the policy making process, like cycle, what we have seen the cycle. And second is, once the cycle is done, then how it is impacted and who are these influential and impacted, put that matrix, and then which quadrant they should be, and then how they have to be moved from one place to another place. So these two things, if you can do, then you have, you have understood this, and then you can easily formulate policies also, right? So you can analyze policies easily, you can write documents, you can write policy briefs by putting your own analysis, and you can also write policy positions, right? So the position is, what is your position on this policy? So you have to write that policy position. That's what I'm trying to kind of motivate you. Yes. So I think we have come to an end. So before we move ahead, or we kind of take leave from this session, I want you to pay attention to this one concept, right? So then we will discuss this in the next classes. So this is called technology governance framework. Technology governance is basically, what is technology governance, right? So it is basically a process where political, economic, administrative authorities, right? So they all come together, right? So they all exercise the authority in developing this governance mechanism, and they also play a role in diffusing it, the technology, right? So and operationalize it, in the sense, so like, let's say there is a invention or innovation happened in the lab, right? So in a university setup, right? So not only when it's happening in the university setup, you have appointed the right people into the university, but at the same time, in the university, you also maintained all this, representative, you have given enough attention to diversity and inclusion, right? So I will again come back to that, Dhara. You have asked the question, so I will come back to that question in a moment, right? So once I explain this, I will come back to that submission part. So technology governance is nothing but the authority, the one exercises, right? So they like government. So what they have this authority to develop, to diffuse in the sense, once the technology is developed, or the invention is developed, technology is developed, how do you bring it to different actors? Like, let's say a payment solution, right? So the Paytm uses a technology, right? So app. The underlying technology, we studied this, right? In the example of Apple. So how Apple has brought a government research institutions, invention, they brought it into the market. Similarly, every technology is developed somewhere else in the research institutes or somewhere else, or even the big companies, invest in that, but they don't come automatically to the commercial field, in the sense they don't come to the market, like where we can buy it, right? Or we can use it. So for that, you need a process, right? So a policy process you need to make it, to make it commercial, to bring it to the market. So that facilitation, so a lot of actors involve again, in the ecosystem. So they bring that to different actors, the whole ecosystem to the market, and they operationalize it in the sense they put certain systems, right, to implement into the to make it commercial. So that is called, technology governance in a very simple terms, right? But it goes beyond that. Technology governance is just not this, but it goes beyond that. So Kaufman and Cray, right? If you see in the footnotes, I have a source, right? OECD. OECD is a Organization of Economic Cooperation and development, right? So it is a group of countries who came together, all the developed countries, they came together to basically do research, advise all, policy advocacy. So all this, they do this from that platform. So they have proposed this framework, right? So I have a link also there. You can take that link and then you can read the whole report. It's an amazing report. So you should read it. On technology governance. So how innovation should be governed, right? So you should read that. So technology governance is not just about operationalizing and technology, but this is a simple terms. But what it means, operationalization, diffusion, and development, and all together, what it means exactly is, it consists of norms. Norms in the sense, how to use the technology, in the sense through regulations, standards, customs in the sense the traditions, right? So we have certain, certain cultural practices, how you use certain technologies, though they evolve also over the time. So we will talk about this in detail in next classes, but just I want to introduce this concept to you before we depart, right? So it can be operationalized through physical and virtual architecture. In the sense, it can be done, in the virtual space, like digital spaces, and it can be done even in the institutional setup, where you go and actively you can present to the people, and then you can tell them what are the risks, what are the benefits. If there are risks, then what kind of regulations you require to regulate this technology and to govern it. So all that you can do it, and it pertains to formal government activities from civil society organizations, communities, and practice. In the sense, it pertains to everybody. So there is no one who is left out in this process, because technology affects everyone. Once it is in the market, it is commercialized, it is coming into the in a commercial field. So it affects everyone, from governments to till the consumer and the user of the technology. So that is what it says. It is an activity everybody it touches. So that is why the governance process also touches everyone. And finally, it is the most important thing what we have to remember in technology governance is the social order, right? Social order in the sense we live in a social order, right? So we interact with the different social beings, right? So one human being or one individual with another individual. So that is called social order. So how there are structures, there are hierarchies, there are inequalities, there are a lot of things. This is all put together. That is called social order, right? And we are also bound by some norms, social norms, customs, traditions, and all that. That's all called social order, right? So the social order, this says social order actually shape technology, in the sense the individuals and the organizations together. So the organizations, in the sense all these institutions, government, universities, companies, businesses, civil society, NGOs, international political institutions like UN, World, everybody influences, and then they all influence and shape the technology along with individuals, in the sense whoever work with them, whoever passively, actively, directly, indirectly, they influence and shape the technology. Similarly, technology, again, conversely, in the sense, again, it shapes social order, in the sense, once we use it, we go through the process of using it, and then we also try to bring our own ideas, right, as a user. So because we have preferences, and we are also bound by social norms, so we force the governments and other institutions to put regulatory norms and regulations to regulate certain technologies, to to even phase out some technologies. And we also kind of pave way for certain technologies to completely go out of the market, go out of the society, and new technologies to come in. So this is all we as a society we do it. So in the sense, the both technology and the social order, these two shape each other. This is called co-productionist concept, right? So this is called co-production. I have not written here, but let me just write it. You can. I'll just write it here in the in your chat. Yeah, it's called co-productionist. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is co-productionist approach. So we will talk about this in the later classes, right? So for now, this is what I have for you. So let's take some questions if you have any. Yeah. You can unmute also if you want. You can unmute and then talk if you, because we are only, you have only 3 people I think here we have, so we can.
हेलो
Yeah, please.
सर, जैसे इंडिया में नॉलेज प्रोडक्शन में एक टाइप के लोगों का वो डोमिनेंस है, तो तो उसके इनोवेशन पर भी वो इफेक्ट पड़ता है। तो फिर जब अभी तक की पॉलिसी और वो हुआ उसमें वो डाइवर्सिटी लाने के लिए अभी तक क्या हुआ?
Yeah, good question. That's what I was pointing out to. यही बात बोल रहे थे हम भी. So what I was saying is representation एक 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 कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रिक्वायरमेंट है ना, एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रिक्वायरमेंट है हमारे लिए अभी रिप्रेजेंटेशन इन ईच फील्ड, राइट? सो उसी के लिए रिजर्वेशन लाया गया, बट रिजर्वेशन इज नॉट इम्प्लीमेंटेड in a spirit it has to be implemented, right? The constitutional spirit jo hai, so which gives the state the power to implement, but state fails because state also is captured by the same forces, right? So that's the problem. The problem lies not just only in the uh, in the spaces where we work or we operate, but the state has to implement, because there is a constitutional guarantee, but the constitutional guarantee has to be made into policy. The policies also are there to an extent, right? In some at least in some areas, especially education institutions, right? But the active implementation में फेल हो गए हम लोग. तो ये इंडिया में एक फेल्यूर है, रहा है, अभी भी है. तो आगे जाके ये फेल्यूर को सक्सेसफुल बनाने के लिए तो हम लोगों को यही करना पड़ेगा. क्या करना पड़ेगा? सेल्फ अवेयरनेस, दो अवेयरनेस अबाउट who we are, and at the same time what actually the government is doing for us, so how we are getting impacted by that. And that's why it's like we need a first education के बाद empowerment. एजुकेशन के थ्रू ही होता है ना एम्पावरमेंट. तो एजुकेशन के लिए ही कुछ कुछ जगह तो रिजर्वेशन है अभी, तो वो एक रिप्रेजेंटेशन देता है, तो वो रिप्रेजेंटेशन काफी नहीं है, इनफ नहीं है. स्टिल देयर इज अ रूम फॉर दैट, मोर रिप्रेजेंटेशन फॉर पीपल हु डोंट हैव एक्सेस. तो बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली वो हुआ नहीं है. तो ये एक कोशिश रहा है कि सिविल सोसाइटी में एटलीस्ट लाइक जो हम लोग कर रहे हैं ना, वी आर ऑल, दैट्स व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू डू, राइट? सो ये एक तरीका है ये. So citizens coming together and then doing putting emphasis on how we we participate in knowledge production, right? This is also a process, knowledge production process है. तो अगर हर कोई जाएंगे, यूनिवर्सिटी में अच्छे यूनिवर्सिटी में जाएंगे, अच्छे यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ेंगे, फिर रिसर्च करेंगे, या एक पॉलिसी में भी पार्टिसिपेट कर सकते हैं वहां से, पॉलिसी मेकिंग में भी. एट द सेम टाइम अगर पॉलिसी मेकिंग नहीं है तो स्टार्टअप भी खोल सकते हैं. तो ये सब एक अपॉर्चुनिटी है. तो ये अपॉर्चुनिटी के लिए तो there has to be efforts from, if government is not doing, we have to do from a citizen point of view, the community, right? The communities have to come forward, and then they have to put a plan and then implement that plan from the community side, right? So that's how you can overcome this challenge, what the state has failed to uphold its constitutional duty. So वो ड्यूटी कर नहीं पा रहे हैं, तो हम लोगों को चार्ज लेना पड़ता है. तो तब तो एज अ सिटीजन्स वी हैव टू टेक चार्ज, एंड देन वी हैव टू do this as a duty, right? So ये एक है. So here also innovation policy also the same way, right? So if state is not able to do it, so we have to make ourselves aware of what's the policy is, how policies are developed, and then you participate in the consultation. At least it's like from your side you write to them, in a when they ask for consultation, because every policy has a consultation. So you write, but one person writing will not have impact. So what you have to do is, we have to come as a community, as an organization, as a social organizations. There have to be more and more social initiatives like this, and then you have to write to them that what you want from this policy. Then the more voices come from more places, more diverse voices, and bigger voices, because it amplifies, right? The more and more people join, and this actually amplifies, in the sense, आवाज ज्यादा होगा, जोर ज्यादा होगा आवाज का, तो तब आपको वो मिल जाएगा, वो स्पेस मिल जाएगा, वो लोग भी सुनेंगे वो बात, तो द गवर्नमेंट विल स्टार्ट लिसनिंग टू यू. सो ये हर जगह यही एक प्रोसेस है, यही एक तरीका है, यहाँ पे भी इवन इन यूरोप ऑल्सो यही तरीका है. ठीक है. सो थैंक यू वेरी मच. सो वी विल close this session today, and then we will meet next Saturday. And probably, if we have a next interactive session on Thursday, then we will inform via mail, right? Okay. Thank you.